Jehovah's Witnesses are a global religious group known for their distinctive beliefs and practices. With around 8 million members worldwide, they are recognized for their dedication to spreading their faith through door-to-door evangelism. They strongly believe that we are living in the time of the end, and that it is their duty to share the message of God's kingdom with as many people as possible. For Jehovah's Witnesses, this work is not just a routine activity, but a fundamental aspect of their faith, something they see as essential to their salvation and obedience to God's will. One of the core beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses is that their religion is the only true form of worship, while all other religions are considered false and under the influence of Satan. This belief shapes their worldview and guides how they interact with people outside their faith. They view themselves as set apart from the rest of the world, often isolating themselves from activities or celebrations that do not align with their teachings. This sense of separation can make their community feel tight-knit and supportive, but also somewhat insular and controlled. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness is an experience like no other. From a very young age, children are taught the core teachings of the religion. They are regularly taken to meetings at the Kingdom Hall, where they listen to Bible-based lessons and participate in discussions. Children learn how to preach, even before they fully understand what it means to teach others about their faith. They also accompany their parents and other congregation members as they go door to door, spreading the message to anyone willing to listen. For me, it all began when I was just 5 years old. My mother and father decided to become Jehovah's Witnesses, and from that moment, my life was shaped by their new beliefs. At that age, I didn't fully understand what it meant to be part of this religion. All I knew was that our lives changed dramatically. We started attending meetings regularly, sometimes multiple times a week, and our home became filled with religious literature and study materials. It was a lot for a young child to take in, but I didn't know any different. I was taught that this way of life was the only right one, and that anything outside of it was wrong or dangerous. I learned that celebrating birthdays, holidays, and even national events was considered sinful, and I accepted it without question, because that was all I knew. It was drilled into me that we were different from everyone else because we had the truth. My parents, having embraced the faith with full conviction, ensured that I understood the importance of loyalty to Jehovah and the organization. They emphasized that our role as witnesses was to stay separate from worldly influences and to dedicate ourselves to serving God. This belief was so ingrained in me that I never thought to question it. As I grew older, I became more and more involved, eagerly participating in meetings and Bible studies, hoping to make my parents proud and, more importantly, to please God. There was a strong sense of community among fellow witnesses. We all shared the same beliefs, the same way of life, and the same desire to stay on the path that was laid out for us. It gave me a sense of belonging and purpose, even though it also meant giving up things that other kids took for granted, like celebrating birthdays or joining in on school activities. To us, those things were seen as worldly distractions that could pull us away from our devotion to Jehovah. As I grew older and deeper into the faith, I felt a strong desire to serve more actively within the congregation. It wasn't just about attending meetings anymore. It was about taking on responsibilities and proving my devotion. Eventually, I became an elder. Being appointed to that position was considered a great honor, and I took it very seriously. Elders were looked up to as spiritual guides and leaders, and the responsibility was immense. One of the primary duties of an elder was teaching. This involved giving talks on the platform during meetings, where I would present lessons from the Bible, often prepared in advance with outlines provided by the organization. These talks were designed to strengthen the faith of the congregation and remind them of their moral and spiritual obligations. I also led Bible studies, guiding both newcomers and longtime members in understanding and applying the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. It wasn't just about delivering sermons, though. Elders were also responsible for offering personal counsel and guidance. When someone in the congregation was struggling, whether spiritually or personally, it was my duty to listen and offer scriptural advice. Sometimes that meant giving encouragement, but other times it meant providing correction or even issuing discipline. It was all framed as an act of love, designed to help others stay on the right path. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of coordination and decision-making as well. Elders would meet together regularly to discuss congregation matters, including issues of conduct and spiritual well-being. These meetings were private and often involved sensitive topics, such as allegations of misconduct or perceived weaknesses in member spirituality. We were taught to handle these matters with strict confidentiality, but also with unwavering adherence to organizational procedures. Yet, as much as I believed I was fulfilling a noble role, there was an undeniable mental conditioning that came with it. My thoughts were shaped to align perfectly with the teachings, without room for personal interpretation. Questioning anything was unthinkable, because that would indicate spiritual weakness or disloyalty. This mindset was drilled into us repeatedly, both from the platform and through personal study. The organization maintained strict control over how we thought and acted. As an elder, it was not just about guiding others, but also about constantly policing my own thoughts and behavior. I didn't allow myself to think critically about the teachings, or to wonder if something might be wrong. To do so would be tantamount to doubting Jehovah himself. We were told that independent thinking was a slippery slope to apostasy, and nothing was worse than becoming an apostate. This mental conditioning created an atmosphere where questioning the doctrine was dangerous. Even entertaining a doubt could put me at risk of being seen as spiritually weak. If someone did openly express concerns or dissent, the consequences were swift and severe. They would be counseled, warned, and if deemed unrepentant, disfellowshipping, completely cut off from the congregation and often from their own families. The fear of dissent kept me and others in line. It wasn't just a personal fear, but a communal one. We were constantly reminded that doubting or speaking out could destroy not just our own faith, but also the faith of those around us. This kept everyone cautious and compliant. To remain an elder, I had to maintain an image of unwavering loyalty, even if doubts crept into my mind from time to time. One of the most troubling aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization is how systemic issues allow abusers to evade accountability. The most notorious of these practices is the two-witness rule. According to this doctrine, any claim of wrongdoing, particularly serious sins like sexual abuse, requires at least 2 eyewitnesses to be considered valid. The rule is supposedly based on biblical principles, but in practice, it becomes an impenetrable shield for abusers. Think about it. How often does abuse, especially sexual abuse, have witnesses? It almost never does. Children and victims are often alone and vulnerable when the abuse occurs, and their voices are systematically dismissed because they cannot produce a second witness. This rule has been one of the most significant barriers to justice within the Jehovah's Witnesses community. In a disturbing number of cases, even when abuse is reported, the congregation takes no action because the evidence doesn't meet their impossible standards. This is how rules meant to protect the congregation instead end up protecting the abusers. The leadership refuses to consider the testimonies of victims without corroboration, allowing predators to remain in positions of authority. As a result, many victims are left to suffer in silence, knowing that even if they speak up, their words will likely fall on deaf ears. For those brave enough to come forward, the consequences can be devastating. Victims are often labeled as liars or troublemakers, tarnishing their reputation within the congregation. Instead of offering comfort and support, the organization isolates and silences them, treating them as threats to the community's reputation. Many are left with an overwhelming sense of betrayal, realizing that their faith community values its public image more than their well-being. But it doesn't stop there. Jehovah's Witnesses also practice something called disfellowshipping, a form of excommunication that cuts the person off entirely from the congregation. An announcement is made publicly, declaring that the individual is no longer a Jehovah's Witness, signaling to the community that they must be shunned. Family members and friends are required to cut all contact, leaving the person isolated and emotionally devastated. Social isolation is an inherent part of disfellowshipping, and its effects can be brutal. Imagine being surrounded by people you've known your whole life, family, friends, neighbors, all turning their backs on you without a word. Your entire support system vanishes overnight, and you're left feeling abandoned and worthless. The intention behind disfellowshipping is to pressure the individual into repenting and returning to the faith, but the psychological toll is often immense. I know this pain all too well. I have 2 daughters who were disfellowshipped. As a father, my instincts screamed at me to support and love them through their struggles. But as an elder and a dedicated Jehovah's Witness, I was obligated to shun them. For about 10 years, I lived in constant turmoil, feeling the unbearable ache of being a father who couldn't be there for his own children. The moments when I broke the rules and tried to reach out to them only led to reprimands and warnings from the other elders. I was conflicted, torn between my devotion to the organization and my love for my daughters. The guilt and anguish consumed me. The rules dictated that I couldn't even speak to them, and I was conditioned to believe that cutting them off was God's will. Yet every day I felt the pain of a father who had lost his children, not to death but to a doctrine that demanded absolute loyalty to the organization over family bonds. The psychological and emotional impact of shunning is profound and far-reaching. It doesn't just hurt the disfellowshipped person, it breaks the hearts of those who are forced to carry out the punishment. The loneliness, regret, and guilt eat away at your soul. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, but deep down, I knew it wasn't natural to abandon my own flesh and blood. Over time, the strain became unbearable. My loyalty to the organization was tested against the innate love I had for my children. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I could no longer ignore the injustice and hypocrisy of the teachings. It wasn't just about my daughters, it was about the thousands of families that had been shattered by these harmful practices. I had to make a choice between blind obedience and unconditional love. And finally, I chose to embrace my daughters and reclaim my humanity. Breaking free from the control of Jehovah's Witnesses was not just a decision, it was a journey marked by immense struggle, deep introspection, and a powerful breakthrough. For decades, I lived under the heavy burden of obedience and submission to the organization's rules and doctrines. Every thought I had and every action I took was governed by the fear of disappointing God and the congregation. I was trapped in a mental prison, convinced that any deviation from their teachings would result in divine punishment. The turning point came during one of those stressful meetings with senior elders. I was being confronted about maintaining contact with my daughters who had been disfellowshipped. The elders were relentless, pressuring me to choose between my position as an elder and my role as a father. One of them bluntly said, "Give up your daughters and stay an elder." At that moment, something in me snapped. I found myself dissociating, almost as if I were floating above the room, looking down at the 3 of us. It was surreal, like I was watching someone else being told to abandon his children for the sake of a title. I now understand that it was a psychological escape, a way for my mind to cope with the overwhelming stress and internal conflict. But in that strange out-of-body experience, clarity washed over me. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't continue to live a lie and sacrifice my family in the name of a doctrine that had lost all meaning to me. When I finally came back to my senses, I knew what I had to do. I looked at the elders and said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." As I walked away, a wave of relief rushed through me, an indescribable lightness that filled me with newfound freedom. I jumped and punched the air, overcome with the sheer exhilaration of being liberated from the mental chains that had bound me for so long. Breaking the news to my wife was difficult. She remained a faithful Jehovah's Witness for another 10 years after I left. Yet I stood by her, supporting her as best as I could, even when our perspectives no longer aligned. It took time, but eventually she too came to the realization that something was fundamentally wrong. She saw the control for what it truly was, a manipulation that kept us isolated from the world and from each other. Together, we began to rebuild our lives outside the organization. Life after leaving the faith was like stepping into a new world. Simple things that others took for granted became monumental experiences for us. We celebrated our first Christmas together as a family, decorating the tree, sharing gifts, and embracing the warmth of togetherness. Birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all the celebrations that had once been forbidden became opportunities to create new memories and rediscover happiness. There was something magical about enjoying Halloween for the first time, handing out candy to smiling children dressed in colorful costumes. Bonfire nights filled with laughter and fireworks felt like a rebellion against the years of rigid conformity. I could finally live without fear of judgment or reprimand, and I learned to take pride in every small step toward normalcy. The most profound transformation, however, was in how I viewed my past. At first, regret gnawed at me, 50 years spent in the clutches of a controlling organization. But gradually, I began to let go of the guilt and accept that I was doing the best I could with the knowledge I had at the time. I stopped blaming my parents, recognizing that they too were victims of the same system. We were all caught in a cycle of control and indoctrination, and breaking free was not just an act of rebellion, it was an act of survival. Looking back on it all, I can't help but feel a mixture of regret and relief. Regret for the years spent under the rigid control of a system that dictated every aspect of my life. Regret for the relationships that were strained or broken because I put the organization's teachings above my own family. Regret for the decades lost in a cycle of indoctrination and blind obedience. But with that regret comes a powerful realization, the acknowledgement that I was part of something that operated much like a cult. It wasn't easy to admit it, especially after being so deeply entrenched for so long. The teachings had become a part of who I was, shaping my identity and my decisions. To suddenly see it for what it truly was, a manipulative system designed to maintain power and control, was both liberating and heartbreaking. Yet, I'm grateful. Grateful that I finally saw the truth and found the courage to break free. Grateful that I reclaimed my life and rebuilt my relationship with my daughters. Grateful that my wife eventually found her own path out, and that we could start fresh as a family, discovering new traditions and embracing freedom together. Most of all, I'm grateful for the simple joys of life, the holidays we now celebrate, the milestones we no longer ignore, and the sense of peace that comes from knowing we are no longer being controlled. Freedom has given me a new perspective on life, one that's rooted in genuine happiness and the ability to make choices for myself. Though the past still lingers, I no longer let it define me. Instead, I focus on the present and the future, living each day with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I've come to realize that life is too precious to be spent in fear and submission. I choose freedom, love, and the joy of living authentically. That, to me, is the greatest gift of all. If you found this story insightful or eye-opening, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread awareness about real-life experiences and personal journeys to freedom. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more stories, reflections, and honest conversations. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thanks for being here.